Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Stephanie Sirkovich. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Seattle-King County, and welcome to our monthly forum in our series of free public monthly forums. We're glad that you can be here to learn about internet privacy. I just wanted to start tonight with a show of hands, and maybe you don't want to divulge this information, but I'll be the first to admit I was affected by the Equifax breach. Anybody else in this room got an email that you were affected? All right. So internet privacy and all of this is an important topic, and one that might seem a little bit out of character for the League of Women Voters to be taking on. But as the League grows in numbers, so do the number of topics that are very important to us and topics of concern for our membership. We're currently conducting a study on this topic. There's room for more people to participate in it, so I'm going to let Pat talk about that in a minute. We've also added a technology chair to our board because we think that technology is such an important issue, and Liz Bander is our technology chair. She's going to be moderating the forum tonight. So thank you to Liz and to the many volunteers who put this together, Pat, who I mentioned, Diane Ramsey, and Joanna, who I couldn't get her last name, so she, what is it? Lados? Lalos. So she's also kind of going in the spirit of privacy and keeping things, kind of low key. And thank you very much to our panelists who have taken time from their busy lives to share their expertise with us here tonight. If you want to support our work and keep these forums free, please consider donating to the League at seattlelwv.org. And I'm going to turn it over to Pat. So thank you.
Well, thank you. My name is Pat Griffith, and you might wonder how we got involved in this. I'm a member of the state lobby team, and when the Internet Privacy Bill, HB 2200, came up for discussion, our lobby team was really excited about getting on board with this. And we discovered that we did not have an appropriate position on the state, on the local, or on the national level. So we're embarking on this. This is meant to be an introduction to the topic. If you wonder how this discussion emerged, in October of last year, the Federal Communications Commission, after many, many months of study and public input, issued regulations on privacy and on internet service providers. But when the new administration came in March, Congress repealed all of those, which had not been put in place yet. What happened after that was that many states, including our own, and cities reacted by instituting their own privacy policies. So as a Seattle and King County League, we can only deal with issues that affect us locally. So that's why we've selected our panel members tonight. And we would invite any of you who are interested to join our study. And we have a parallel state study that can go much further. We also have a little questionnaire here so that if you are not involved or a member of a local league, or even if you're not a league member, we'd like your feedback because we'd like to see what you think and some ideas on how to proceed. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator and our committee chair, Liz Bander. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat and Stephanie. So the state of Washington is an interesting place, and it affects it at the local issue because in Article 1, Section 7, we're guaranteed the right to privacy in the Constitution of Washington. That's not the case for all states. So that adds an interesting bit of complexity to the study as we're doing it. To kick things off, before I hand the podium over, internet privacy, people hear a lot of different terms: net neutrality, internet privacy, metadata, things like that. This study is specific to internet privacy, so it's about the right to control information about yourself online, and who can access that data is really where this study begins and ends. Net neutrality is a distinct topic. Metadata is part of the data that you have out on the internet. but we're very much talking about just internet privacy as a whole. So I'm going to give each of the panelists 15 minutes. So if you want to come up to the podium and speak, we'll start with Ann Nagel. So she's the Associate Vice Provost for Privacy at University of Washington.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. I have to give a general disclaimer to begin with that the views and perspectives that I'm representing are my own, not that of the university. I am not here speaking on behalf of the university. I'm here just speaking as an individual who works in the privacy field. The other disclaimer that I want to give, which relates generally to some of the things that I will say, is that privacy is very dynamic and it's evolving. So the perspectives that I represent are at this moment, and it will change. So I was asked to give some general overviews of privacy and then some wrap up about things individuals can do from an internet privacy perspective. I worked in information security for several years and now have transitioned to privacy more specifically. So privacy has a different definition to many individuals. I could create my own. I don't have to. There's lots of definitions out there. For some, it means the right to be let alone, freedom from interference or from intrusion, or to have a say in the information that is collected or used about you. The definitions go on, and that's what makes privacy so dynamic. Personal data also varies. For many individuals or for corporations, there may be a finite definition, but personal data is associated with an individual. It can be related to their geography, their identity, their health, their behavior, their actions, technology or their interactions with technology, their communications, their images. All of this is information that is now transferred, used, stored, or passes through the internet. So it's very dynamic. The definition of privacy also changes depending on who you interface with. It changes by generations, by cultures, by countries. It changes through history, and whether you're a corporation or whether you are a government agency. So it's very, very broad. In the US, there are various laws related to privacy, and they are very siloed. They are often by industry, by topic, by sector, by type of confidential data or personal data. There is not an overarching law in the US that covers all types of data. There's also not a wide international law. There's laws by different countries, and those are emerging right now just as a conversation is evolving here in the US. So when we start to think about privacy and internet privacy, one of the things Pat asked me as I came in is, what do you think of the law? And the response I said was, which one? Which bill, which law, which one are you referring to? Because while the topic here today, or the conversation started because of a particular House bill, there are many that touch on privacy directly or indirectly, and some get more attention than others. Right now, we have a very siloed approach to privacy, not just in the state, but in the US. So it really depends on the perspective that you want to represent, I guess, as a league, as part of your study, and as individuals. And I'm going to stop there because I was asked just to give some general perspectives about privacy, and then I'll wrap up about some things related to security and internet privacy since I have that background as well.
Thank you so much, Anne, for the overview. Next, we're going to have Sue Peters from the Seattle School Board. and an education writer come and give her perspectives on internet privacy.
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this evening. This is a really important topic, and it's a topic that has been very near and dear to me, first as a parent of 2 students who were in Seattle Public Schools, and now as a member of the Seattle School Board. Currently, I'm serving as the Seattle School Board president. So the 21st century is proving to be the century of big data. And so with that, we have to be careful about what it is we share and how we share it. As you can imagine, in the realm of public education, we're talking about students, and student data is a veritable gold mine for anybody who wants to make a potential profit off of student information. And so because public education is a vast field with lots of potential for profit making, there are a lot of companies out there in the education business who develop products and services that take advantage of student data. They gather student data, and sometimes they are offering a service that could be potentially helpful, like helping students figure out what kind of classes to take, what kind of college to apply to, but the exchange is always a gathering of student information. And so the challenge to all of us in serving in public education is, how do we strike the balance between providing services and information for our students where they have to provide some information, but at the same time protect their information and protect their privacy? And that has been a huge challenge. And I'm going to admit to you all that I'm very worried about it, and I'm a bit of a cynic about it, because I think there's always strings attached whenever we're involved with any of these companies that have products to sell. So let me see if I can make it through all my notes here. I think No Child Left Behind was a point where accountability became really important. And the federal government said, we have to measure every student, we have to make sure every single student is succeeding, we got to disaggregate the data and find out students of every background and make sure that they're not being left behind. And so on that level, that's perfectly fine. But in the interest of accountability, all of a sudden data became gold. And there became a heavy focus on data mining and potentially reducing students to data points. And so now you often hear people talking about data-driven decisions, data-driven this, data-driven that. And arguably it's reached a point where it's a little bit overly obsessive on data and forgetting sometimes the personal side, the human side of what a student is. And there's also lots of risks that come with this data gathering. So we do have a law called FERPA on the books. And what I discovered as a parent was that FERPA actually doesn't protect our students that well. In fact, FERPA has been weakened over time. I was a co-founder of a blog called the Seattle Education Blog. And when I was writing for the blog, student privacy was one of the first topics that I wrote about. And what I discovered was a marketing firm did a push poll, and somehow they had the contact information of families and teachers. And I wondered, how did they get the contact information of families? And so I did some sleuthing on that and discovered that school districts can share some student data with organizations that have an education function. And that's somewhat loosely defined. And the data they can share are things like your student's name, their image, lots of information about them, as long as it's going for an educational purpose. So what happened in this case was this information was shared, but it got into the wrong hands, and it ended up in a marketing firm that did use it for political purposes. So I wrote a blog post on it called, "Should Our Students' Data Be Shared with Every Tom, Dick, and Pollster?" And then I went and testified before the school board about this. And I said, I'm really concerned about this. And I feel that the FERPA form, which is something that is handed out to families at the beginning of every school year, should be an opt-in rather than an opt-out. So in other words, if you don't want any excess information shared, you have to sign off on this FERPA form and say, I don't want this shared. But if you don't do anything, then it is going to be potentially shared. So when I get to the end of this, I'll talk about what we can do as parents to empower ourselves and what school districts have to do to protect this data. So like I said, there's a lot of companies that have discovered that student data is a real gold mine for them. And I'll give you a case study. There was one called Connect EDU, and it was an ed tech company that provided a service that allowed students to input information and then help guide them towards what sort of college or career choices they wanted to do. There's another one now called Naviance that does something similar that the school board is currently being asked to adopt and approve a contract for, and we'll be deciding that, I think, on November 15th. But this other one, Connect EDU, they went into bankruptcy. They filed Chapter 11, all right? And Seattle Public Schools was using them at the time, and so they had lots of student data in their database. And once they went into bankruptcy, I think I had just joined the board right then, I said, okay, well, they have to delete all the student information, right? And it turned out, no, actually, because they were in bankruptcy, everything was kind of held in suspension because they were trying to find a vendor. They were trying to sell their company to someone else, and our student data was their marketable asset. And that is what parents like myself had feared. Like, okay, under the benign pretext of giving our students some service, you're also gathering something from them, and it adds to your value as a corporation. So ultimately, it was resolved, and Seattle Public Schools was able to retrieve that data. And there are stipulations in contracts that the Seattle Public Schools has when it goes out to vendors saying what can and can't be done with student data, like how it can be used, where it can go, and how it has to be deleted, you know, if there were another case of a Chapter 11 situation. So there are some stipulations in place. And we recently had a presentation, the school board did, from one of the people from our IT department, April Murdoch, and she did a really good job explaining to us all the different safety precautions that the district puts into all the systems we use to either remove personally identifiable information, encrypt the information, and I'll admit to not having the technical knowledge to explain it to you beyond that, but it was reassuring to hear that the district is trying to do the right thing. And we have a board right now that really cares about it and talks about it a lot. So they've gotten that message. And the district has had cases where there have been data breaches, where information has been released that shouldn't have been. So the district does know it's got to be very careful about that. However, despite all of those measures that the district puts in there, it's not going to completely protect our students. And so here are some of the other concerns. We have in our schools lots of computers, more and more every day. And you can't be surprised to know that some teachers will be tempted by all the different websites and programs that you can get for free online that can help them with their work and help them engage their students, especially when we have under-resourced schools. Unfortunately, some of these sites will require students to log in, add information. I remember there was one case where students could make their own blog, and students were putting all kinds of identifiable information on there, where they live, their favorite pet, names of their siblings, and there was no protection around this. And so those of us on the board have said, wait a minute, we've got to set parameters around this. We've got to tell our teachers, if you're going to use something like this, no student data can be shared. And so I believe we actually need a student data policy and a student privacy policy, and so that is something that I would like to see happen. I started drafting one, but I'm actually finished with my 4 years on the board, and I will not be continuing, but I'm certainly interested in helping my colleagues continue with the student data privacy policy. I think that would be a good thing for us to do. So, let's see. Now, school districts rely on partners, and those are organizations that provide all kinds of supports that the district otherwise could not afford. Everyone from City Year to the City of Seattle, volunteers, but often in exchange for their services, they ask for data sharing agreements, and that's how more information gets shared with these partners. Now, this information is not supposed to go past these partners, but you know, whether or not that's airtight is not totally certain. Now, in the most benign situation, what's happening is the partners want information about students so they can help them, all right? So the reasons are fine, but whether that's protected as well as it should be is something that has been, you know, of concern to me and to other directors. And then there's some educational organizations that want to do longitudinal studies, and so they're very interested in gathering student data over many, many years. And so there's talk of people who want to study our students from preschool all the way up to age 20, you know, and then there's people like Bill Gates who are interested in that kind of data gathering. And then there's people like Mark Zuckerberg, who's now jumped into the whole education forum. And that makes me extremely nervous, and I'm not the only one. As you all may know from Facebook, Facebook gathers so much information from our students and from all of us who participate in it. And we have a whole generation that seems very willing to put everything out there in public. And so we have a sort of vulnerable new generation. So if you have someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Facebook, who now wants to get into education and create, who knows, personalized learning platforms, curricular materials, tests, you can imagine how fine-tuning it to the specifics of every child could be very appealing, but it also means using student data. And, you know, privacy walls are fall apart under those circumstances. Another thing to know is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is this new foundation, I guess, that Mark Zuckerberg has created, is an LLC. It's not a nonprofit like the Gates Foundation, so it does not have to subscribe to the same kind of transparency rules that a nonprofit would. So we're not going to ever really know exactly what's going on with the Zuckerberg Initiative, so we have to keep an eye on that one. That's a fairly new one. Let's see. So what can parents do? To some extent, parents can opt out, but not entirely. You know, when your student joins a public school, their information does get collected and it's put in a database, and to some extent that needs to happen. You know, the school district needs to keep track of these students, and right now we have 54,000 students. But in terms of sharing this data with outside vendors, there hasn't really been the safeguards in place that I would like to see in place. So when a new product is purchased, the student data is combined with that product. And so the district just bought one called Homeroom that's supposed to also sort of track students. And the district is thinking about buying Naviance, and that will be for, I think, middle schoolers and high schoolers. And right now, it's assumed that everybody will want to use it, and parents aren't really given an open opportunity to opt out. If they did, it probably would require a certain process to do that. And, but it is something that I think we should take a look at. However, products like Naviance are supposed to be helpful, right? They're supposed to help our students figure out how to connect what their interests are with what classes they take, with what kind of colleges they might want to go to. So there's a positive aspect to that. And it's meant to be a tool to help our counselors, because we do not have enough counselors. It's just another aspect of our underfunded schools. And so our high school counselors on average have about 400 students each that they're responsible for. So there's no way they can give them the one-on-one academic and career counseling that they need. So a tool like Naviance could be very helpful for that. It's used in private schools, use it. And so you can see the appeal. But we have to be very careful about what is done with that information. And so we were actually supposed to vote on this past week, and we sent staff a whole bunch of questions saying, wait a minute, where's this information going to go? What are we agreeing to? What are the strings? What's the fine print? What is this? And so they've gone and they've done some more closer look at what's being done there, and they're also taking a look at how to encrypt information or how to not forward on information that is identifiable. So there's certain information that doesn't have to be shared, you know. So again, I'm out of my league here in talking about the details of this, and I know there's at least one person in this audience who could explain that aspect of it better than I can. But the point is, we on the school board are very aware of the dangers of these products and of these agreements, and we're trying to set parameters around this. I'm also a firm believer in opting out and giving parents the right to opt out of whatever they would like to opt out of. Most often it's been testing, because that's a whole another area where data can be collected. And so I firmly believe in that. And we recently passed an assessment policy that stresses the fact that parents can opt out and that we value the rights of parents to make these decisions and the rights of students to make that decision. So like I said, this is a big topic. I don't know if I've been able to cover absolutely everything, but I will welcome your questions later on, and hopefully I can delve into any other issues that you have concerns about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. Next, we've got Julie Wise, the King County Director of Elections, to address issues affecting voting.
You haven't heard security and voting in the same sentence this year, have you? No? Okay. So good evening. How is everyone? Good. It's cold out there, isn't it? It's really starting to feel like it's fall and going into winter. So again, I'm Julie Wise. I'm your elected Director of Elections. I was elected in 2015, and I'll serve a 4-year term until 2019. And I really appreciate the opportunity here to talk to you a little bit about voting and elections and security. I will hopefully touch enough into the internet aspect of elections to be part of the subject matter, but I also will touch a little bit just kind of on security of elections anyways, because if I have an opportunity with a microphone and a captive audience to talk about security and elections, I'm going to take it. So I think that Jim's going to really talk about this in probably a greater detail as well, is that government is really, in general, balancing this aspect of data, right? Where we want to have open data to be able to provide to people, but also making sure that we have privacy as well for people. So when I talk about elections and security and internet, there's really two sort of separate aspects here. And the first one I'm going to talk about is when we talk about voter data. What I mean by that is your voter registration data, your voter information. And then the second piece is your vote, the results of the actual election, and tabulation. So I'm going to separate those and talk about voter data first. So again, we're right in the middle of this conversation. We're consistently balancing transparency, security, accuracy, privacy, all of those sort of election buzzwords, if you will. In the voter registration area, just some information as far as maybe what's news to you, and I'd love during our Q&A to be able to hear if these cause concerns for you, but our voter registration data is really public data. And when I say our voter registration data is public, I mean most aspects of it. It's probably easier to say what isn't public data. Your signature is not. Your contact information, although people call me all the time to tell me, these campaigns keep calling me, why do you give them my phone number? It is not me, I promise. So we do not give out phone numbers or email addresses, or your social security number or your driver's license number. So those are really the pieces that are kept private. So what that does mean, though, is that your name, your date of birth, your residential address, your mailing address, did I say date of birth already? Are all public information. And in ways, that's a really good thing. Because then we ourselves can look at the voter registration roll and make sure oftentimes with candidates, it's often a way that we vet candidates, right? We'll often see in the Seattle Times about people's voting history. That's also public information. And also, we as voters are allowed to challenge another voter. If we have concerns that Stephanie is really registered somewhere else, I can challenge her voter registration, not that I would. And so there's some aspects of kind of keeping elections honest in that way by having that information public. But again, we're not providing information about how to get a hold of you via your Yahoo account or whatnot. Not to get too far in the weeds here, but just so you know how voter registration works in Washington State, the Secretary of State of Washington actually is the official keeper of Washington State voter registration rolls. So all 4 million or so voter registration is really the official record is at the state level. But all of your 39 counties have their own voter registration systems and databases. And information and data is being shared back and forth. So when the wonderful league provides us with voter registration forms, those will go to the local office. My amazing team will enter that data, and then that data is fed back up to the state. And so it goes back and forth. Allison knows exactly what I'm talking about. She's always sending me a lot of voter registration forms, which is wonderful. And so that data is going back and forth. Myself, the King County Elections Department, as well as the Secretary of State's office, has a great relationship with the Department of Homeland Security. And that's also at a county level, I'm sure, at the city level as well, where we're monitoring and making sure that we're not seeing any sort of suspect penetration into our different systems. And so that's 24/7 that we're having that information be reviewed. So again, voter information, as we all know, you can actually register online as well. But again, that information is in a secure statewide system and at the local county system as well. And again, we're constantly checking our information and our data. Just a couple quick things that you might be interested about how we scrub and keep voter registration data clean, if you will. Washington State is in a consortium of about 23 states across the country called ERIC, Electronic Registration Information Center, where we're looking at voter rolls across the state to make sure that we don't have people registered in multiple states. We're also getting information from Social Security, we're getting information from the court systems, and we're getting information from the Department of Licensing, United States Postal Service, we're checking our addresses with 911, so there's a lot of different data points that we're using to keep our voter rolls clean. And I'm really proud of the work that we do here in Washington State. One other piece, just really quickly to point out, is there's an opportunity, not an opportunity, but there is a program called the Address Confidentiality Program. People would then, in this program, their voter registration information is not public. Every aspect of it is private. To join, though, the Address Confidentiality Program, you have to be actually approved by the Secretary of State's office who runs the Address Confidentiality Program. Often members of that program are victims of domestic violence or threats against their lives, and that's why they have that program available. So next piece I'm just going to quickly touch on is tabulation, your actual votes. I think in this last year or so that I believe sort of the conversation about election security and voter fraud and those sort of things is more about the first piece I talked about, which is that voter registration database. Again, we're monitoring it constantly to make sure that we don't see things that don't make sense. And any system in Washington, any voter that gets registered in Washington State, that voter registration has to be validated and verified by the Secretary of State's office. What does that mean? It means that the Secretary of State's office has information with the Department of Licensing and Social Security Administration to make sure that when you register, that you have to provide either the last four of your social or your driver's license. And that's got to check out with the date of birth you provided on that registration form and the name that you provided on that registration form. So it all has to be checked out and vetted before you can actually become an official voter. So the last piece here is tabulation, the election results. No one, I guarantee you, is hacking into election results in King County or in Washington State. Our tabulation system is not connected to the internet. It has zero connectivity to the outer world. It is literally housed in a secured room that I don't even have access to, which is fair. And we have to have both biometric and a badge and two people and cut a seal to be able to enter the room. And then you have to have two people with two different passcodes to be able to enter the computer. We also have in our tabulation area, we have 25 security cameras across the facility. And I skipped ahead there. I'll talk a little bit more about tabulation, then go back to our actual facility that I always invite everyone to come see a tour. If you'd like to come see a tour, it's really cool. Your ballot gets scanned, and then we are verifying your signature. So remember, you're signing the back of your envelope. If you haven't voted, make sure to get your ballot in. Tuesday, November 7th is Election Day. So you want to sign that back of that envelope. In the vote-by-mail world, how we verify that you are you is your signature. Because I'm not going to see you at the polling places and check your ID, right? So the signature that we're going to look at is the signature that you provided on your voter registration form and or the Department of Licensing. And we will keep a scrapbook of all of your signatures. I have about 3 on file myself, And we'll look at all those signatures because we know we all have different signatures, right? The signature that we do really quickly on the keypad versus the one when we sign a contract, et cetera. So we keep different ones on file. My staff is trained by Washington State Patrol to verify those signatures. Very few are actually challenged. The initial challenge rate is about 3%. After we cure those signatures, it goes to about 0.5%. So ballots are actually then being separated from your return envelope. You have that security sleeve. It's kind of like a taco shell. It's a weird shape. You're immediately removing that, and it's done at a very quick pace. And then you're separating those return envelopes that had your name or any identifier. Now we just have the ballots and security sleeves. It's been removed from your identity and from your votes. And then it's going to be scanned into our scan system. Again, if you do get a chance to come by the facility, you can see that there's no wires to go outside. We purposefully did purple cords of everything so you could see and actually follow where all the cords go. So again, the tabulation system is not connected to the internet. People can't hack into it. And again, we're working with, of course, the Department of Homeland Security. I have been on the list for a little while. As you can imagine, a lot of people wanted to get on the list. I'm on the list with the Department of Homeland Security to be in my office at the end of the month to do an official assessment, which I'm really excited to then, not just me sitting here telling you, trust me, but also the Department of Homeland Security will have that information as well. So just really quickly, I'm probably running out of time, and this is a little bit off the internet topic. We have a great facility. We have a fifth of a mile loop in our facility, so we are literally transparent because the wall is plexiglass. You can watch us, you can come anytime you want. We work Monday through Friday, about 8 to 5. You can come and do a self-guided tour. I love giving tours. And so you're really able to see that there's 25 cameras. There's 6 web cameras, so if you're bored tonight, or sorry, we're not working right now, but if you're bored tomorrow, jump online and you can actually see us processing ballots. You can see the scanning of them. You can see the signature verification, the opening. You can watch that right from the comfort of your home. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the constant question I get quite a bit is, will we go to online voting? Probably not anytime soon. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. So next up, we've got Jim Loader, Director of Digital Engagement for the City of Seattle.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. And thank you to Stephanie, Pat, and Liz for having me here tonight. I'll talk a little bit about my role at the city and generally how the city protects the privacy of residents of the city of Seattle. But I do very much want to take you through the overlapping and, to me at least, fascinating world of broadband and internet law and policy as it applies to privacy. So the person who should be here talking to you today is our Chief Privacy Officer, Ginger Armbruster, who's in my division, but who is on the East Coast at the NYU Privacy Localism Conference. So you've got 2 Seattle people on both ends of the country talking about privacy tonight. The reason for that is I think Seattle has one of the strongest, certainly one of the most comprehensive privacy policies that a city government of any large city in the country. What I have here, and I'll pass these out or make these available to you, are beautiful laminated wallet cards that cover the privacy principles that the city operates under and manages your data, the data that we collect and store and share and report, and the conditions under which we do that. So those are there. Everybody can take one. I want to thank specifically the League of Women Voters in general. I was reflecting today that it was 1988 when I voted in my first presidential election and didn't know what I was doing. And my father, in fact, handed me the League's guide and said, here, this is what you need to read before you cast your ballot. And every election since then, I have done exactly the same thing. Yeah, so poor Mike Dukakis didn't make it that year, but no, not my fault, at least. I can't be blamed for that. And I look very forward to voting again for Seattle's first female mayor since 1926, whoever that may be. So my background is, I've got a background in higher ed. I was fortunate enough to work closely with Anne at the UW for a while. And then I spent 5 years managing IT systems and data for the Seattle Public Library, which hopefully you know takes privacy very seriously. Privacy protections for library data are actually encoded into state law. And the working in the library system was a fascinating test bed for me and learning opportunity for me to understand all of the issues. So I bring that perspective to City. The privacy program is one of the areas that I oversee. The digital engagement area also includes responsibility for the city's broadband policy. So the overlap between broadband and privacy is what we're here to talk about today. We're also responsible for the city's digital equity initiatives, which seek to ensure equitable access to high-speed and affordable internet. And we also run the open data program. So Julie did a nice overview of the complications around opening data, yet protecting privacy with the state's Public Records Act kind of looming over everything. So that's a fun set of issues that I'd be happy to talk more about at another time. And we also run the Seattle Channel, our Emmy Award-winning government television program, which partners with King County Television, who they're in the back, and we're looking forward to rebroadcasting this footage once you can hand it over to us, so that's great. So what I'm here to talk to you about today, actually I was reminded my boss, the Chief Technology Officer, issued what he called the CTO's Constitutional Challenge a couple of months ago, where he challenged everybody on his executive team to say, I want you to chart the authority that you have to assign your staff member, any staff member, a task to perform and trace that authority to the US Constitution. Go. So, you know, we're all busy and I didn't really give much thought about it until a couple nights later at 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up like this in the middle of the night and I said, the 10th Amendment, it's got to be the 10th Amendment. And rushed to the computer and spent the rest of the night charting exactly how I have the authority to ask somebody on my staff to do something. And the prize, which I won, was a dinner at the Capitol Grill, so that was nice. So what I'm going to do is basically chart through federal law down to the municipal level regarding internet privacy and tell you kind of what's what and what you have to look out for. The issue of internet privacy is bundled together with a host of other regulatory matters, and Liz talked about a few of them in the introductory remarks: net neutrality, but also access to utility poles and public property, universal service subsidies, which are very important to us in the digital equity world. But tonight, like the other panelists, I'm going to focus on privacy. Those other topics would consume entirely too much time. But if anybody wants to buy me a beer sometime, I would be happy to talk about pole attachment regulation for as long as you want me to. The heart of the matter is whether or not the internet is classified by the Federal Communications Commission as a telecommunications service or an information service. I did have a couple of slides in case we had the capability to present where I have the wonky definitions of those two terms up for your convenience, but just if you'll bear with me, telecommunication service is essentially like the telephone. It's the means to transmit information regardless of facility. An information service is, and this one's, you gotta love lawmakers, a capability for generating, acquiring, storing, transforming, processing, retrieving, utilizing, or making available information via telecommunications. So which one of those definitions kind of sounds like the internet? They kind of both do, right? So that's really where we're stuck right now. The internet is currently classified as a telecommunications service. As of 2015. In 2015, the FCC's open internet order reclassified broadband as a telecommunications service, subject to Title II of the Communications Act. So that's the Communications Act of 1934, in case anybody's wanting to look that up. This order established broadband providers as common carriers under the same framework as our telephone network. So in essence, the FCC said the internet is a neutral service that provides a capability to support applications and the transfer of data and information, but it itself is not a service that provides or produces information. That makes sense. It's a system of tubes, right? At that time, the FCC also enacted stronger privacy protection rules for internet service providers, or ISPs, under the authority granted to it by Title II. Those protections were to take effect in 2017, but they were repealed by Congress back in March. The stronger rules mostly applied to limiting the ways that ISPs can share and use data to sell targeted advertising. Significantly, it gave consumers a degree of control by requiring that ISPs provide a conspicuous way to opt out of having such data collected or shared. And that data can include app usage history, web history, and your mobile location, among other things. So it's important to consider that typically consumers can make choices about what applications on the internet to use. For example, Sue talked about Facebook. If you feel that Facebook's terms of service are a little too liberal in how they collect and use data about you, you can simply choose not to use Facebook. What the stronger privacy rules were designed to protect relates to how the internet service providers, not operators of specific websites, collect and share data about your internet use in general. So regardless of which application you choose to use or not use, data about your use of the internet is something that ISPs could collect and share if these stronger privacy protections were not there, and are not there. ISPs argued that an information service such as Google or Facebook was not subject to these stronger privacy rules, and therefore the rules created an unfair competitive landscape. The FCC's counter argument at the time was that internet service is fundamentally different from information service, and it needs to be more strongly regulated. Simply, the ISPs have access to everything. Earlier this year, the FCC signaled its intent to reclassify the internet as an information service, which would remove it from Title II regulations that apply currently to the internet. The decision has impact for consumers. Key provisions in Title II promote access to infrastructure by service providers, affordability for consumers, and privacy protections related to the information that consumers access. Without Title II classification, these rules would not apply to broadband services. For privacy, the responsibility would fall to the Federal Trade Commission rather than to the FCC. Specific to privacy, we have Section 222 of the Communications Act. Personally, I think everybody should have a favorite section of federal code, and this one's mine, well, at least one of mine. Section 222 requires telecommunications carriers to protect customer proprietary network information, your subscriber data, data related to your use of the network, etc. The FCC has the authority to promulgate new broadband privacy rules in the future, which is an authority that no other agency, even the FTC, has. In fact, the FTC has no legal authority over internet service providers, so their ability to enforce even existing consumer privacy laws with regard to the broadband providers is questionable. So now, it's the federal level. Shifting gears to the municipal level. We have, in the Communications Act, Title VI, which grants municipalities the authority to regulate the cable industry. Cable television, I'm talking about. Cities such as Seattle may require that cable operators obtain a franchise agreement with the city in order to provide cable services within our boundaries. Under a franchise agreement, the city may collect fees of up to 5% of a company's gross revenue, which we do, require carriage of certain public government and educational channels, including the Seattle channel, and require that operators not discriminate where and to whom they provide service. We can't do a lot of things. We can't tell them what rates to charge. We can't tell them you have to provide service to these particular consumers, just that you can't redline, those types of things. So there are limitations on what we can enforce, but in general, we can regulate the cable industry. In Seattle, we also have something called the Cable Customer Bill of Rights, which is sort of our extension, if you will, of the authorities granted to us under the Cable Code. It grants us additional authority to require certain levels of customer service and service response times. If your cable installer fails to show up for an appointment, if your cable goes out, if you're left on hold for too long when you're reporting a problem with your cable service, you may be eligible for credits, and the city may be able to impose fees. Just call my office. The 3 franchised cable operators in Seattle also happen to offer residential internet service, as I'm sure you know, often as part of a bundle package. They offer this service over the same infrastructure and facilities that they use to offer cable television service. So therein lies a little bit of confusion about what's what. In 2002, the FCC adopted a rule that classified internet service as distinct from cable service. The finding clarified that local jurisdictions do not have the authority to impose or enforce a franchise for internet service, even if that service is provided by a cable operator or if that service is transmitted over the same facilities as cable television service. The franchise fees, I hear some gasp in the audience. Yeah, like it's fun to regulate the cable companies when they also do other things. The franchise fees a city or county may collect are likewise limited to gross revenues generated only by a company's cable service. As a consumer, you may experience certain confusions when looking at a cable bill. I've heard. And part of that is because for many years, because of this situation, cable companies had to keep separate books for cable service versus internet service versus telephone service because of the different layers of federal regulation that applies to some but not all of those services. So that's not excusing the fact that those bills are so confusing. It's just explaining the origins of why things are separated out the way they are. The city, therefore, has very little authority under the Cable Act or the Cable Code of Seattle to exercise our regulatory authority related to internet services, even if those internet services are provided by a regulated cable company. One exception to the broad exclusion, we believe, regards privacy. Seattle Municipal Code, specifically SMC 21.60, grants the City of Seattle authority to issue rules related to the privacy practices of cable operators. The way that the code is written, and in order to have a franchise, the companies need to agree, and a franchise is essentially a contract, so they contract that they will enforce the cable code. The way the code is written is it applies to cable services and other services provided over the same facilities. It also protects subscriber data and information about viewing cable TV and websites visited by the customers. So in 2017, the Chief Technology Officer adopted a director's rule that outlined procedures by which cable operators must demonstrate compliance with this section of the code. The new rule states cable operators must obtain explicit opt-in consent before sharing a customer's web browsing history or otherwise using such information for a purpose other than providing a customer with the requested service. Those new procedures went into effect in September. Each of the cable companies gave us a letter attesting to their compliance with it, and we are currently reviewing to make sure that they really are. They also must provide copies of their current terms of service both to us and to all of their customers, which we check up on. The details of that director's rule are available at seattle.gov, and I can answer any questions when it comes to that. So there you are. Thank you very much. And don't forget to come up and get your card.
Thank you so much, Jim. Anne, if you come back up to discuss what you can do about privacy, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a couple of ideas and what we can do about privacy. I'm not sure if you want me to address from the league's perspective or for the league or for individuals or both. Both. Well, there are a couple of themes that I was trying to take notes on and capture from everyone's presentation today. One, I'll start with the last presentation, then kind of work my way back. The laws are old. The laws are really, really old. They have not kept pace with technology. It's really hard for laws to keep pace with technology because technology is evolving so rapidly. And in order for many of the service or technology providers to perhaps validate their products, they like to collect data on the usage of the information or on the usage of the service, the product, people's interactions with it, whatever data points are available. So it's a constant game that we're playing. It's a vicious cycle, I guess you could say. But in that, there is a balance to strike, right? So the other thing that I heard the panelists talk about is what data represents. Data, personal data, represents money. Right? People are making money off of personal data. It represents power, control, and opportunity. So it is a real balance to strike. And it's something that we all need to consider is when is that opportunity outweigh the potential, I guess, privacy implications, which again are very personal. Back to my opening remarks, they're not universally shared. So you have to balance that, and balance is hard with many of these topics. The other thing that I heard them talk about is opt-in versus opt-out. There are pros and cons to both options. There are people who are strong supporters of one or the other, and it really depends on the situation. Jim gave some great examples of opt-in versus opt-out, but it depends. There are times when you may want opt-in, opt-out, and then there are times, as the panelists referred to, where it's neither. It's maybe a circumstance, it's a notice, it's a disclosure, a disclaimer, and that we need to provide the information for our schools to provide the service to our students. Is another example. So it's not straightforward, it's dynamic, it's evolving, it always will be. So the other thing, I'm very intrigued by this because I just developed privacy principles for UW too. So I'm going to take a card and compare notes here. But as a league, and you think about what you want to do about this particular law that engaged this conversation, one of the things you can think about is what are your privacy principles? Where do you sit on these topics? What are the principles that guide you, whether it's this particular law or another law? That's why principles are so good from a privacy perspective. Okay, so then I said I would also provide some tips for what you can do as individuals. One of the things I encourage people to think about is what their strategy, what their individual privacy strategy is going to be. And to think about it before you're in a negative situation or before you're asked for your data. So to really have that conversation or have that decision, have the conversation if you have kids or family members, or have that conversation or make a decision up front before you're asked for your information. And think long term. Our data stays around forever. People are doing these longitudinal studies, right, that we talked about. So it has long-term implications. And then make an informed decision. And before you act, think about the intended and the unintended consequences of sharing your personal data. You can also, if you want, take steps to review information that's available about you online. There are pros and cons to doing that, so be careful what you ask for. And I would say be aware of the open and the privacy aspects of online groups, online forums that you participate in. Because those are things that you may have assumptions about, but you also may not control today or in the future. That changes as groups themselves change. So security, I'm sure some of the other panelists could talk about this too, because it seems like they all have a little bit of a passion for security. Think about how you're securing your confidential data and your personal information and what options you have available. Use encryption. There's lots of different types of encryption that are available. There's lots of different ways to do it. It's a complex topic, but there are resources out there to learn about it. Use good password practices. Don't reuse your password on different sites. You know, these are things that you can do to protect your privacy and mitigate exposure. And you just remember or be thoughtful about when you're sending your data and how you're sending or how you're sharing it with other groups. As leagues, as organizations, as corporations, as agencies, you know, these are things that we all need to think about. And then, you know, just prepare. You know, once you've gone through all these steps, prepare. Think about how you maybe want to modify your privacy preferences on your devices, on your browsers, in your apps, because while we're talking about internet privacy, as Jim pointed out, the personal data related to ISPs is very different than the personal data associated with applications. Check your privacy settings regularly because they change, new options come out, the terms change. And then think about your profiles that you have and how much you want to share about your own individual privacy. Once information is out there, this day and age, it becomes public. People can repost it. People can share it as they choose. So we really have to, again, think long-term about the information we're sharing. And then, are we going to Q&A, or I was going to invite the panelists if they have any tips, because I went into some of the personal privacy aspects, if there's anything they wanted to share on that topic.
Yeah, I think it was excellent. I wrote some notes.
I'm sure there's more. You know, there's lots of things to consider, but those are just a few that we've compiled. So. Okay.
Thank you so much. I would like to open it up for questions, so if you'll come to my left, be able to ask questions of the panel.
Hi, I'm Julie Sarkisian, and I have a question for Julie Weiss. I only recently became aware that undocumented citizens can have driver's licenses in our state, and I've been curious since then as to how the county or the Secretary of State makes that distinction as to who is a citizen and can vote and who isn't.
So everyone heard her question, obviously. Everyone can hear me? Okay. So in Washington State, along with just a few other states, at the Department of Licensing, you may not be aware, but your citizenship is not checked or verified at the Department of Licensing level. And so one could actually become a registered voter here in Washington State by using the Department of Licensing and getting registered to vote. And so what we do is, it's really the honor system in Washington State. That's how the legislature here has set up voter registration in Washington. And so a voter is attesting to an oath both the first time that they actually get registered to vote, as it is, of course, a crime to get registered to vote if you are not eligible. And then also at the time of actually voting, you sign another declaration or oath, again, that states that you are eligible to be a registered voter. I, in my tenure here at King County Elections, 17 years, have not seen a case of a voter that is a non-citizen go through the court systems. Many years ago, we had a person who attempted to register her dog. We caught that. And so, yes, I will say that in Washington State, along with a couple other states, we're not doing a citizenship check at the Department of Licensing. One could register at the Department of Licensing by attesting that they are eligible. And I will tell you that, again, I have not heard of any cases in Washington State where one has been prosecuted for being registered when they're not a citizen. But it's a great question that continues to have dialogue in Olympia.
All right, thank you very much. We'll take the next question.
I'm telling myself to focus because I have several, but I'll focus on one at the moment. So until recently, I was under the impression that FERPA was almost like HIPAA. But I have become aware recently, almost today, that actually FERPA does not have, there's not really any repercussions for violating FERPA, while there are very severe repercussions for violating something like HIPAA. So it seems like there's room for action on that. I would like a little comments on that.
I'll start with that one. So FERPA, oh, thank you, Joanna. So FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act from 1974. It got revised, I think in the last 10 years or so, and my understanding is it got weakened. So it's true, there aren't really any repercussions if you violate FERPA. But as a public institution, like at the Seattle School District, we still obviously honor FERPA and follow it. What can be done about it? You know, I don't know. I haven't heard people talking about, you know, reinvigorating FERPA. I know I've been perplexed as a parent when I discovered how little it provides in terms of protection. And even before you get to the repercussions part, it does allow an awful lot of sharing of information to organizations that have some sort of tangential association with education. And so I've always found FERPA to be not a very strong protection. So perhaps you're bringing up the question of should we take another look at FERPA. It's a federal law, so we're talking about a dialogue at that level. I'm not sure whether the climate right now is open to that, but it is an important topic. Did anyone else want to weigh in on FERPA? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
So my question is for Anne. So in addition to the Equifax breach, a couple of years ago, so I'm a former federal employee, and you remember China hacked the federal government and I got a letter from the federal government that my personal information was at risk, and so I got this fraud protection on my credit now. And I guess my question is, how concerned do I really need to be about, you know, these threats from China or from Equifax? Do I need to be, you know, worried that someone's going to steal my identity? And how confident should I feel? You know, I've got these free fraud monitoring services that are looking at my credit, and is that something that I can feel like I can, or do I need to go out and freeze my credit, or, you know, I mean, what's your advice on that?
Whoa. Okay. Well, data breaches happen within many companies. I'm familiar with the particular breach that you're referring to. It's very hard for corporations to guarantee security because there are vulnerabilities that happen in our systems. There are also individuals who try very hard to break into those systems for various reasons. So, unfortunately, data breaches have become a very popular topic in the news, and we hear about them often. The credit monitoring, why not, right? If it's a service that's being offered, there's various different approaches to managing your identity from a credit monitoring type perspective. I know some people who choose to freeze their credit, and they only lift that freeze when they need to apply for something financially, you know, buy a house, buy a car, or whatever it is that they may be doing where somebody needs to run a credit check. So that's another option that is available. You know, again, there are pros and cons. That means when you go to buy something where your credit has to be checked, or for whatever other reasons your credit may need to be checked, you will have to go through those additional steps to lift that freeze on your account. Should you be concerned? I think you should be aware, right? And always be aware, just as I was talking about with personal data online, to monitor it, to watch it, to take whatever safeguards you can to protect it. Those are all great measures. The Attorney General's Office for the state of Washington actually has some great information on identity theft and protection.
Great. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Liz Dodds, and I really appreciate all of your expertise tonight from the different areas. For everyone's information, I'm a retired school librarian, and school librarians across the country, including in Seattle, are busy informing and having discussions with your students, your children and grandchildren every day about the internet, which is one of the things I did. One of our topics was, it's not your digital footprint, it's your digital tattoo. So
Great line.
I actually have now want to change to a different topic, and that's about voting. So, Julie, I guess this one is for you. What happened a few months back? Some national person was asked for all of our Washington data. And so can you tell us a little bit more about what the latest is on that? And then I've been hearing some news recently that across the country, there's more voter suppression than we would expect to have. And I know that's like a different topic, but it's related to, well, we want these many forms of ID, and if it's not related, we don't have to answer.
All right, so we'll take the first question for Julie, the first part of that.
Sure. So there was a couple months back, I think, as you were mentioning, that there were letters that were sent, is my understanding, letters that were sent to every Secretary of State across the country asking for their voter data rolls. If I was asked of it, I would have said no. Heck no, is the polite way, probably is the way I would have said it. And ultimately, we did not provide our voter data rolls for or to that request, and that request has since been rescinded. And so there was an understanding, my understanding was that there was a desire to get all the voter data rolls from every single state together, and that the individual had a file or a list of people that were truly citizens in the country, and wanted to do their own voter data sort of comparison. Washington State did not provide voter data roll requests that were requested of us, and in King County, I would not have done that either. Voter data is available for the public, but it also says that, just like I think we've talked a lot about, there's certain requirements for how you can use voter data information and voter data rolls, and it would be on that I would have denied that request. But yes, there is a desire, I think, in some parts of the country to suppress voters and to look at citizens or non-citizens or non-residents and the voter rolls. I really appreciate the position that Washington State has taken, where you do not show an ID in order to register in Washington State. Unfortunately, that is not the trend across the rest of the country. I think some federal voting laws would be very helpful in that regards. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll take the next question.
Hi, I'm Bridget Kushka. One thing that I'm really concerned about is the elderly population, and even my parents. They don't know how to use the internet well. They don't understand. Like, they're concerned about privacy, but I don't think they understand. Especially hearing about what schools and how the data is just sent away. Sometimes it's frightening. Are there any special protections against, like, I know in research, like, there's vulnerable population protections, but are there any protections in place for people like the elderly who it's really, because they don't understand the technology, it's easy to take advantage of, or yeah, just people, yeah, vulnerable populations.
All right, who wants to start with that question?
Thank you, Julie. Sadly, I'm not aware of any particular protections. I mean, I may just be ignorant about ones that exist. I do know that as we look at the digital literacy training and programs that we support at the city, we are, our attention at the city is being raised about specifically the senior population, largely through an initiative called the Age-Friendly Seattle Initiative that is being run out of the Human Services Department in Seattle. It's co-sponsored by the AARP. We recently had a hackathon, so an event where people came and tried to use computers and code and data to come up with some solutions to address issues facing people of all ages in Seattle to get around the urban area. It didn't specifically cover privacy, but through our partnership with HSD, I think our awareness has been raised of the issues that the population you're talking about face. And for our next round of technology matching fund grants that we give to community organizations who teach people digital literacy skills, next year we are going to focus on senior serving organizations to a greater degree than we have in the past. I mean, that's probably a drop in the bucket, but it's, you know, it's something, and we're definitely aware of those issues. You know, as I am aware through my mother freaking out about Facebook every time that I tell her to go there to get pictures of her grandkid, because largely of the privacy stuff that she doesn't understand. So I absolutely understand what you're saying.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to respond to that?
It's an interesting question, and I think that applies to my parents as well. It almost sounds like we need parental controls going in the other direction. So maybe that's what we have to look into. I mean, I recently adjusted both of my children's telephones, their iPhones. I put a control on there so they couldn't access certain YouTube videos. So some devices have controls you can put on them to prevent access to things that might be problematic. But in terms of protecting vulnerable populations from sharing things when they shouldn't and making bad choices, I think that's all part of this brave new frontier we're dealing with. It's a really good question, though, and I'm hoping somebody is coming up with these sorts of, security measures.
I don't know of any laws particularly for vulnerable populations, but I know there are laws related to cybercrime, cyber harassment, cyber stalking for all populations. And those continuously evolve.
All right, thank you very much.
I have my name is Zara Kublin. I have what might be a kind of stupid question. I hate to say that, and you may have just sort of answered it, but there's this sort of fraud side of the privacy question of, separating people from their money. And then there's this other sort of creepier, sort of unformed idea of privacy, and that they're sort of more 1984-like. And I'm kind of wondering, other than the obvious of somebody defrauding you of your savings, why do we care? I mean, what is the really scary thing about this specifically? I mean, so that was one question. The other is, you don't have to answer this one, but why aren't there more applications and sites coming forward that do protect your data, don't share your data? I know there was DuckDuckGo. I used to use that as an alternative to Google, for example. And I just wonder why that's not happening as people are getting more afraid of this. Okay. But have fun with that.
All right. Would you like to start, Anne?
Well, that's a really great question. Why do we care? And, well, I would say different people care to differing degrees. Whenever I have the conversation with privacy, have a conversation about privacy with someone, I hear all sorts of different responses about to which degree they care about their privacy. And for many people, they don't know until they are negatively impacted or they know someone who's been impacted and there's a loss of some kind, a risk of some kind, whether that's a risk to their human life, to their online identity, or to their financial well-being. The list probably goes on and on. So for many of these things that we're talking about, earlier I said think long-term about your privacy strategy, and that comes up for corporations, agencies, businesses as well. What are the long-term implications of the use of personal data, and what does that mean for you? So it's kind of a general answer to a very specific question, but I think it depends on what type of information people have on you and are sharing, and to really think, well, what could all the opportunities be for someone to use that information for good and bad. And remind me what the second question was. There was two. Oh.
Was
I'm possibly curious about kind of that 1984 aspect, not a real specific privacy piece, but in the world, regular world that we're moving into, in which maybe we're all able to be manipulated by whatever sources they are that just know stuff about us. So that's kind of what I was thinking. If it's not, or are we really just talking about a very specific kind of privacy breach, or a real broader concern about moving into that? Sorry.
Yeah, I have an idea, but I'll
Okay.
formulate my response. I'll let you have at it.
Thanks, and this is my completely unformulated response. I think you asked a really interesting question that I wrote down about why don't more services come online like DuckDuckGo and others that are designed from the ground up to protect your privacy. And I think the answer is, and somebody mentioned earlier, data is revenue. And so there may not be enough people who would be willing to pay for a service like that. And I think there's a saying that if you're using a free product, you are the product. So the data that you generate is what keeps Facebook and Google and other services afloat. So I think that's an answer. Is there's an economics issue, I think, with the internet and how it came about and how it evolved, and it's very interesting to go back to the origins and understand that we're really living with the consequences of having a free and open internet, because somebody's got to pay for it, and the way that has caught on. Micropayments have sort of failed, subscription models have failed, paywalls have failed, pushing advertising out to people and collecting their data and selling it to other people, that's the bonus, right? So if we want to keep using things for free, that's the price we pay. And I think, so that kind of gets to the why do we care. Informed consent, in my opinion, is why we care. I use a lot of services where I know that my data is just out there. I'm never going to be elected to the Supreme Court. I'm never going to probably win an election. The minute that somebody searches for some of the stuff that's about me online, I'm out of there. And I've made that choice in a lot of ways, but I've had the information, I've had the knowledge, I've had the education to make that choice. And I think that using the services that I use are more valuable to me than what I'm giving up. It's personal choice, and as Ann said, everybody has to make that choice on their own. And then I think, just speaking from the city's perspective, we do, obviously through our principles and our policies, value the protection and our role in protecting people's privacy very strongly, maybe mainly because in a lot of cases we are a monopoly. You don't have a choice not to interact with your city government. And we have a lot of power over people's lives. We might pick up your trash, we might keep the lights on, we can also put you in jail. And that's a lot of power to invest in an entity. And somebody else made the link, data is revenue, but data is also power. So, we take the responsibility of the data we collect, given the power that we have over people's lives, very seriously, and that's why we care, and we think that's why you should care. So, hope that answers your question.
I'd like to answer that from the perspective of why it's so important to protect our children and students. I think librarian Liz Dodd, her point about what you put out there is a tattoo that really, really resonates. It's something that we really have to impress upon our students. So I think of an example that was in the news earlier this year where some students who had been accepted into an Ivy League university had their admissions rescinded based on something they'd put on Facebook, all right? Some kind of misbehavior that they had, glibly put on out there for the world to see was seen by the admissions people, and they lost their acceptance. So that's the lessons we have to impress upon our children is, if you want to share all of this, a lot of people are going to see this sort of information. On a more serious level, from a school district's perspective, we have all kinds of data, including student discipline data, all right? And we don't want our students to be brandished for life with the behavior, that they did when they were young. And so that's another reason why it's so important to protect this information and not let it get beyond where it needs to be. And so I see all kinds of risks of sharing information. And frankly, when I go to Facebook, I'm always shocked at what people are willing to share and overwhelmed by everything people are willing to share with me. I find it emotionally draining, frankly, but that's a whole other issue.
The other thing I'll add is people who are collecting your personal data or companies that are collecting your personal data are making decisions about you. They're making decisions about the opportunities that they provide you or don't provide to you. So it's just another aspect of thinking about what data is being collected, what information is being shared, and what role you want to have in that.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions.
I'm Glenda Carper. I have several European friends that I've had for many, many years. We don't write letters anymore, but we do communicate through email. And one of them, who happens to be a German, has made it really clear that he does not want to discuss any kind of political issues via email. So I'm wondering if Europeans have any different attitudes about that kind of thing than we do, or they know something that we need to know, or if you have any ideas about that.
All right, thanks. Anne?
Europeans think very differently about privacy than we do here in the US. In fact, there's a new law coming into effect, the European Union General Data Protection Guide Regulation, referred to as the EU GDPR. And it has some very different approaches to privacy than what we do here in the US. It talks about privacy in terms of very broadly personal data that's available related to a natural person is the term that they use. That includes things like your IP address. And the law, it's a very lengthy law as well, but it also has some specific requirements about the control associated with data, the processing of data, and sharing of data. It goes on and on. There's many different things to take into consideration, but in that particular law, privacy is a personal right. Individuals have a right to control their data and what is done with their data. So it is drastically different than what it is here in the US.
All right, would anyone else like to comment on that? Okay, take the next question.
Mine was a little bit more of a comment in that I am a senior citizen, and when my child first started school, the opt-out thing was whether your name wants to be in the student directory. But I'm surrounded by people who know all the pitfalls, and I do not read all of the, agreements when I say yes. And I think a lot about, do I think, do I really want to create another password? No, I don't think I'll do this. But, so when you're thinking about, I think a lot of senior citizens are pretty smart about what they're doing. But I do have neighbors that at some time were caught in a phishing thing where they clicked on something and they refused to ever use email again. And I think that's too bad. So I feel like if you're thinking of educating seniors, you have to be very specific about what you're trying to do, because we don't all fall into the same bucket of whatever concerns we have. And certainly what you were saying about yes, you know your information's out there, and it's like, oh, I didn't read that agreement, but, you know, I didn't really have time, and I really wanted to do this. So, and I think the children really are where we need to protect because of the tattoo business.
Do you have anything to wrap up?
I do have a couple questions. Do you know to what extent our internet providers are collecting browsing information? And my second question is that many of us are fairly political activists, and we always get these, sign this petition. Where does that information go? And I don't sign any of that anymore because I don't know what it is, but is that something we should be take care about?
Okay. Like to start off on that one. Jim?
Obviously, there's no absolute way to know what the ISPs are collecting or what they're doing. As I indicated, they in the Seattle area, the three main wireline providers, so not the wireless providers, have submitted attestations that they are not using browser data, either in ways that go beyond what they need to use to provide service, which is still open, subject to sort of big loopholes and interpretations. But and just in some one-on-one conversations with the wireless carriers, we don't have, they maintain that they are also not using browser data. However, there are definitely wireless carriers that have advertising and affiliate programs that are tied directly to the browser data that you generate. So again, there's no good way of knowing for sure, but I think you could just assume that they've got it. With regard to the second question, I think, very generally what your question got at was how do you validate which sites are authentic and how you can trust the information on the sites. And, there's no such thing as perfect security. There's no such thing as perfect trust. An organization like MoveOn or an organization that, where you have some way of validating who they are, is likelier to be trustworthy than other sites. But I think your level of caution you're displaying is very good, and you're asking a lot of the right questions. There's no simple answers, of course, but you're asking the right questions.
Thank you. Anyone else to respond? All right. Thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciated it. All right, and that wraps up our Internet Privacy Forum. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
Come and get your privacy principles card.